Hi there, I'm Harrison Lowman, managing editor of The Hub. Well, a year out from when Torontonians will be picking their new mayor, we thought there was no better time to speak to the only, I think, major candidate who's declared that they'll be throwing their hat into the race. And that is why I am welcoming Brad Bradford, mayoral candidate and councillor for Ward 19, Beaches East York, also a former urban planner. Welcome to The Hub. How's it going, Brad?
Great to be here. Nice space and happy to chat Toronto with you.
Good to have you in person. It's always better in person. Okay, so let me get this straight. Tell us why you deserve to be mayor of all, amongst all the other millions of people in this city. Why do you think you should be the guy at City Hall?
Well, look, I'm all in on Toronto, and I think this is a city that's worth fighting for. You know, I'm raising my two daughters here. My wife and I built our house and our family here in the city, and you know that's the story of so many other people who are trying to achieve success and realize their dreams in this city, but increasingly it feels like that is further and further away. So the goal needs to be to make Toronto the best city in the world. Full stop. Best city. The best city to raise a family, the best city to build a business, and the best city to unlock our collective potential. And the way we're going to do that is by getting back to basics. Because right now it feels like the little things are slipping here in Toronto. You know, it snows in the wintertime and we can't get the streets cleaned. It's hot in the summertime and we can't keep the pools open. And when you go to register your kids for swimming lessons, it feels like the Hunger Games. So I want to go back to basics. I want to take care of the little things for Torontonians so Torontonians can go out there and achieve their success and realize their dreams. And that's why I'm running for mayor.
You've said we've resigned ourselves to mediocrity. Are we still a world-class city here in Toronto today, Brad? Well, not in the future.
No, I think this is the perennial debate, and it is a resignation towards mediocrity. And I hear from Torontonians every day different versions of the same story. You know, the city has never been more expensive, it's never been more difficult to get around, and it's never felt less safe. And so, you know, you can make your top 10 lists of world-class cities. You can look at the experts that put those out every year. But I think we should be shooting to be the best. There's this tendency here to sort of shoot for bronze and be content when we're coming in fourth. And I just don't think that's good enough. So there's a lot of things that are great about Toronto. And I'm bullish on this city. You know, we're in the midst of a World Series right now, and there's a buzz around that. And we all want to be proud of Toronto. We want to be proud of this city. But it feels like Toronto's not living up to its potential. So when I think about what works best about this city, it's our people. You know, it's the mom and pop shops on our main streets. It's the entrepreneurs who are trying to do something new and innovative. Toronto works because of the people in Toronto. We need to make sure that City Hall actually works for Torontonians, and that's what I'm looking to achieve.
At the same time, you say we can't be all things to all people. Are there services, are there things the city is providing that you think we can't afford, whether it's cost or for other reasons, to do anymore in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, like your household budget, you have to be constantly reviewing that and going back and making sure that where you're spending those dollars still aligns with your priorities. And I would point to the fact that City Hall hasn't done a core service review since Rob Ford was mayor. So you've had two administrations, some for a very long time, and they just don't want to have those difficult conversations. And when I say Toronto City Hall has been all things to all people, it's because, you know, we've lost our focus on local government and core services. And when you spread yourself a mile wide and an inch deep, it means that you end up standing for nothing. It means that those core services are delivered at like a C- or a D+ level, because there's an opportunity cost when you try and take too many things on. It means that the things that are most important don't get the attention they deserve. And those are the things that I point to, like making sure we have 911 operators to pick up the phone when you have an emergency.
We had this happen to us. We witnessed something horrible, and it took a very long time. First, there was a busy signal on the line, and then finally a fire truck came. So, I get it.
So that's got to be a priority for local government, and we have to resource that accordingly. You know, same thing with I think.
But what gets pushed aside on the chopping block? Like, what are the non-core services? I know you mentioned Olivia Chow, for example, hiring hundreds of people to be information officers on the TTC. Yeah. What can we not afford?
Well, so I wouldn't be doing that. And instead, the biggest problem with the TTC right now is people don't feel safe. So they don't feel safe. You know, moms don't want to push a stroller down in the station, and seniors don't want to be there with a walker. And you go onto line 2 at Bloor Station, everybody's back is against the wall. So having social workers down there in 3 of our 70 stations is not going to provide the confidence for the majority of the public to start using transit in the way that we need them to if we want to reduce congestion, if we want to stop revenue loss, and if we want to get people moving. So rather than having 200 information agents, which are, the folks out in front of the TTC stations in the red smocks pointing behind the TTC station saying, that's where this transit is, we would invest in police officers to be in the transit stations like you've seen in other cities. And I think that deterrence presence, is something that would restore confidence and safety for a vast majority of our customers on the TTC.
Tell me if I'm onto something here, and this relates to sort of public safety. I get the sense, and I've lived here all my life. I'm 34 years old, and maybe there's some golden age thinking here, but it feels sometimes like with that fear comes you're looking out for yourself, you become more individualistic, you start wondering if there is sort of a unified whole when it comes to the citizenry of Toronto, rather than people, looking over their shoulders, looking out for themselves. Do you get the sense that social cohesion has deteriorated over the last decade or so, Brad?
I think for sure. I mean, look at what's been happening in Toronto over the past 24 months with the protests and the intimidation mobs and the threats of violence, schools that have been shot at, businesses that have been firebombed just because of who owns them. So I think they're, in Canadian society, but certainly as it plays out on the streets here in Toronto, we have seen a bit of a fissure. We have seen an erosion of that cohesiveness, and we have to work to get it back. At the same time, I also in this job get to hear from tremendous residents who are stepping up and helping out in their communities, whether that's getting involved in their local hospital or working with at-risk youth and running sports programs in the parks, or even just the simple act of helping that senior citizen shovel the sidewalk in the winter. Like, there are really good things that you can point to, but I don't think that we can take our, sort of collective will and collective mission of this city for granted. We cannot just assume it's always going to be the way it was.
You got to feed it.
And I think we're starting to see some of those cracks. So we got to fix it.
Are you a conservative?
I, like 75% of Canadians, have voted for different parties in different elections. Yeah. And so, look, I was not a fan of the previous federal government. I thought that, like the government at City Hall, they had lost their focus and lost the ability to prioritize on what the key things are. But I don't even necessarily vote the same federally, provincially. For me, sometimes it's about the party leader. Sometimes it's about my local candidate. Sometimes it's about the policy and the platform. And sometimes it's, it's about where I am in my life at that particular moment. And I can tell you right now, I'm very family focused. I'm thinking about my two daughters, their future, and governments at all levels, how they're going to respond to that.
Is City Hall, municipal politics, the hardest place to lean right, do you think?
I think in the city of Toronto, if you're a centrist, if you're a practical, common sense oriented person.
What are you up against?
Yeah, well, you get painted as, sometimes people will call me alt-right, which I think is hilarious. I think it's all relative to the context of Toronto, but I really don't see City Hall issues as left or right. Like, when you get kicked off of line 2 because somebody's having a mental health episode or the train breaks down and you're forced up to Bloor Street and you're stuck there waiting for a bus for 40 minutes, that's not a left or right issue. That's not NDP or Liberal or Conservative. That's a quality of life issue in Toronto, and it sucks. Similarly, if your front door gets kicked in a violent home invasion and, they're going after your keys for your vehicle or they're robbing you, it's not a left or right issue.
But to getting to those issues get bogged down by, and we had, I think, Daniel Tate from Integrity Toronto in a few weeks ago, a focus on identity politics, opening up every proceeding with a land acknowledgement and not, getting to the root of the issue and having, a bunch of frills around it instead.
For sure. This goes back to the lack of focus and prioritization on what's most important for Torontonians. And I would say Mayor Chow and her administration are way off the mark of what matters most to people. And we spend a disproportionate amount of time on things that are performative, things that are very expensive, things that deliver very little value for money, and things that are not responding to the big 3 issues that I hear about every day, which is safety, cost of living, and congestion. And for me, if you're not dealing with safety, cost of living, or congestion, you're not representing Torontonians, because that is all I really hear about every single day. And the good news is there's a lot of things that we could do to fix those things. We just need to have the focus and the attention and the prioritization those issues deserve. And right now, that's not what we have with Mayor Chow.
Do you speak to Mayor Chow?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because in the council chamber, we're colleagues, right? We show up and work together. It's just like sort of any place of employment. Is there some friction there? For sure. We don't agree on a lot of things, but at the end of the day, I want Toronto to be successful. I want this to be a great city to raise a family or to build that business. People need to bet on Toronto and be bullish on this city. And so in some respects, I want Mayor Chow to be successful. I just think that the direction that she's taking us is not the right direction. And I think if you look at any of the recent polls, they would suggest the city's moving in the wrong direction and we need a change.
One of the main things I hear about you is, first of all, I think people are really getting to know you because you've been running for many months now. And there was, how many candidates? 102 in the last mayoral by-election. So they're getting to know you now. But one of the things I hear about you is like they want to know what you stand for above all else because they see things like, in 2020 you wrote an op-ed, bike lanes are the path to Main Street recovery, and more recently you're voting against bike lanes in regards to Bloor Street. What are the things that, and people are allowed to change their views. This idea, yes, you can be criticized as a politician for being a flip-flopper, but people want to know, I don't know, what are the unalterable things that that Brad Bradford looks towards, that he's rooted to, what he stands for and what he'll stand against?
Well, look, I see it so clearly now, and it's based on the feedback from thousands of Torontonians and my experience at City Hall. We have to be laser focused on those three things. It's got to be about public safety and security. It has to be about cost of living, and it has to be about making it easier to get around Toronto. I think leadership is about having the humility to acknowledge and recognize when you got it wrong and go back and fix it.
When have you got it wrong? When have you changed your views over the last few years?
Well, look, like I think the vast majority of my colleagues and the previous mayor, we all sort of raised our hand and supported the bike lane on Bloor Street West. And I can tell you one of the first things I would do would be to remove that because it's not working. And as we've seen the data and as you've seen the volumes, the idea that build it and they will come with respect to cyclists, it hasn't materialized. But the impacts as it related to congestion and as it's impacted those local businesses or emergency services and first responders have been significant. So rather than
how much would that cost to remove them? Do you know?
Well, the city put out an estimate in response to the provincial's position on Bloor, Yonge, and University, and it was a really big number. But I think it was artificially inflated because they were trying to throw out such a gargantuan number that the province might back off. At the end of the day, like you look at that section at Royal York and Bloor, it's paint and some bollards. I don't think it's significant. It's just about having the will. But the worst thing is, this mayor and the current council will just double down on a bad take. They'll gaslight the residents of Etobicoke and say, well, no, you're the problem because you're not riding a bike. And it's like, well, think about how people's lives work, right? Like, I do ride a bike. Like I ride a bike because it's more reliable than transit, and I'm not stuck in the same sort of traffic as when I have to drive to City Hall. But my wife, for example, if she's picking up the kids and one's in daycare and one's in JK, and she's got to go to the office and, maybe go into a bunch of different project sites across the city, she might not have the luxury of taking transit or riding a bike every day. So we just have to recognize it's a big city, 3 million people, 630 square kilometers, and we have not yet successfully built out the transit infrastructure for it to be a viable alternative for all of our residents. So people are going to be in cars here for a long time, whether or not Twitter likes that. It's just the reality. And we have to do things, we have to stop doing things that make it actively more difficult to drive in Toronto because it's already bad, but there are a bunch of decisions that this mayor, the previous administration have made that make it actively worse. And I'm committed to going back and fixing that. And I think that's part of leadership.
One of the other things I hear about you is, for some they say, there's a great head-to-head race between him and Olivia Chow. But when John Tory, the former mayor who stepped down over having a relationship with a member of staff, how long ago is that now? 2.5 years or so. The picture changes. Your odds decrease. What are your views on John Tory entering or not entering this race? Do you have a message to send to him in the next few months?
I see John from time to time out and about, and we chat, and it's very friendly. I supported him when he was the mayor because I wanted him to be successful, because I wanted the city to be successful. Right now I am the only person who has declared their intention to run. I'm the only person who has said my name will be on the ballot October 26, 2026 as an option to be mayor here in the city. And so hypothetical polls that reflect name recognition, a year out, I wouldn't put too much stock in that. But I would look at what's happening in New York City right now. A former political titan who resigned over sexual allegations is trying to come back, and it looks today like he's not going to be successful in that effort against Zoran Mandani, who I really couldn't disagree more with many of his policies, but his campaign and his message of change and his message of doing things differently and calling out the failed formulas of yesterday's leaders, that has some currency. And I think that could very much be the case here in the city of Toronto. Look, if you're not happy with where the city is today, people will need to vote for change. They will need to vote for something different. And the reality is traffic didn't get bad the day Mayor Chow was elected. Now, I would suggest she's made it a lot worse. But we had those types of problems. Encampments didn't appear overnight the day that Mayor Chow was elected. Now they have proliferated and she's made them worse. Transit reliability didn't plummet the day she was elected. I would suggest that the resources that she's been deploying haven't been effective in addressing that. But we've had 10 years of drift. We've had 10 years of decline. And if you want a better future for the city of Toronto, I would suggest that we need to try something new. Strong, decisive leadership that's not afraid to do the difficult things to move the city forward, and someone who has the focus and ability to prioritize the most important things. And if we can do that, then I think Toronto can be that city again that we're all proud of, that city where people come here as a destination to invest, to bring their talent, to bring their capital, to build things, to make this a city where builders want to come. And it has the potential to be one of the greatest cities in the world, and I think that should be our goal.
You talk about new. Does new mean young? Because you kind of inferred there's a generational aspect to this. Listen, you're 39 years old. John Tory is 71 years old. And this goes beyond just this race. We're seeing this in the U.S. and elsewhere, as you mentioned. Is there a message that you might have, I don't know, that other folks in kind of our generation might have, I don't know if you're millennial, in that, listen, you guys had your kick at the can. There's a ton of issues that we need to face, and we'll be the ones overwhelmingly facing them just because of our age. You've had your time in the sun. Now it's our time to step forward and meet the moment. Is there some of that there?
It is about generational change, for sure. It's about a new chapter for the city of Toronto. And like, I'm living that life. I grew up the product of a single mom who raised 3 kids on her own. We didn't have a lot of money in Hamilton. And I remember when I was 13 years old, my mom took me in on the GO train for my 13th birthday. We bought tickets to the Jays in the 500 section. We went to the old spaghetti factory on Front Street, and I walked around downtown Toronto, and it was like that shining city on the hill. Like, literally the skyscrapers were shining. I was looking west, watching the sunset. I have this core memory of the greatness of Toronto, and I remember thinking, man, it would be incredible to live there. This is such a cool place. And yet when you walk around, Front Street now or the Esplanade, it doesn't feel that way. Like you're walking over people who are sleeping on the street. You see drug paraphernalia, crack pipes, needles everywhere. The garbage bins are not cleaned up. And yet the city's budget has never been bigger. Your tax bill has never been higher. And it would suggest to me, as somebody who, is grinding it out to live here in this city, like so many others, that City Hall is not doing a very good job on delivering on those basics. And so the difference between my experience and that of, say, former mayor or a current mayor is I have 2 young kids. I see the challenges trying to get your kids in swimming lessons. I understand, the rat race trying to get the kids dropped off in the morning and pick them up before 6 o'clock in the evening. When I go to the playgrounds, I understand what it means to have to navigate through a campsite to get to the playground equipment. It's not very nice. And we have a mortgage. And we have childcare bills, and we're fighting to put food on the table and gas in the tank just like everybody else. So that's a different lived experience that I think speaks to where I am in my life. And it reminds me every single day of what I'm fighting for, who I'm fighting for, and what we need to do to make sure that this city is successful going forward. It has to be a city where families can come and have access to good jobs and good services and safety. And that's a different worldview than some of my certainly the current mayor and maybe some of the other people that might get into the race.
Yeah, there's lots of people that grew up here now that can no longer afford to continue to grow up here, and then they then have to leave Toronto and leave that, I don't know, what do we call it, Torontonian dream, as it were.
And you know what's really interesting? Because I think about it as a dad and somebody who's 39 turning 40 next year. I think about it from that perspective because it's my friends, my colleagues that are being forced out of the city in a fight for affordability, a fight for safety. But I'm also getting feedback from, older folks in Toronto who have the house and, the door's painted red because they paid off the mortgage and they're in a good situation. But they are also concerned because it's their kids, their millennial kids that are having to leave Toronto because they can't afford to live here and then they can't see the grandkids. So it's actually, that's not my perspective, that's their perspective, but they share that with me and it's sort of hit in a different way. It's like, this is actually a problem for everybody. You and I are just experiencing that firsthand as that generation, but the impacts touches on both sides.
So you're an urban planner. What's the number one thing the city can do to unlock housing and alleviate some of this crisis?
The number one thing we can do is reduce the cost of housing. And that is in recognition that 30% of the cost of a unit of housing here in Toronto is taxes and fees and development charges. Nobody makes more money on housing than the government. And rather than Mayor Chow's approach to create more bureaucracy in an effort to build more housing, she calls it the public builder. I would take the money that the federal government had provided, I think it was $374 million from the Housing Accelerator Fund. I would use that to reduce the cost of development charges by 25% and push the province and the feds to match on that so that we can make housing more affordable to build. We can make project financial viability better so that the banks will finance the projects so that we can get the shovels in the ground. What is not understood broadly right now is housing starts have cratered, and we haven't been building housing at a significant number last year, this year, and probably
they get lower each year.
Yeah, and so we will never be able to build our way out of that. So even when the market, the units that are available as surplus in the market are absorbed over the next 18 to 24 months as interest rates improve and consumer confidence is restored, we will never be able to catch up from taking a 3-year holiday off of building. And so cast your gaze towards 2027, 2028, 2029. That's when we're going to have a real crunch because we just didn't build anything for 3 years. And that is because governments were too timid in their responses or, as Mayor Chow has gone in a totally different direction.
She's at, 25,000 municipally owned rent-controlled homes, I think is her goal, right?
Yeah, and how many of those have been constructed? Closer to zero than 100. So I think it's just a totally inadequate approach. And anybody that's been around City Hall or government long enough knows that government doesn't do things faster or for less money than the private sector. I don't think there's a shortage of qualified developers or builders in Toronto. There is just not the conditions right now for financially viable projects. And if we want housing that people can afford, then we need to look internally, reflect on that, and do everything we can to reduce the costs on the government side. And we haven't had that kind of courage at City Hall ever.
Let's reflect on the last 2.5 years of your life as we bring things to a close. Last time you ran for mayor, a ton of fanfare. You did finish 8th with just over, I think it was 1.3% of the vote. What's changed? What is going to be different this time? What have you learned from that? You learn a ton of stuff from failure. What would you say is the biggest thing that you've come out with in the last 2.5 years?
You know what? The last election was pretty crazy. I didn't have running for mayor on my 2023 bingo card. It was such a whirlwind, and you're right. It was an amazing opportunity to learn. I think the biggest thing is time. Having the time to go and build relationships with folks across the entire city, having the time to listen to people about their concerns and frustrations, but also their hopes and aspirations. When the campaign starts on May 1, when my campaign will formally start, we'll have a great team together of people who have a shared vision to make this the best city in the world and all the things that we can do from a local government perspective to enable that. And then on the personal side, I think, my daughter Bronwyn was born, my second daughter, right in the closing days of that campaign. And
you were on a debate stage and you were waiting for text from your wife as to if you need to rush to the hospital.
Well, like I said, we planned to have the baby, but again, I wasn't planning to run for mayor that year. So life happens. But I could tell you my perspective as a father of 2 in Toronto really shapes everything I do now. It's my reason for getting up in the morning. It's the reason for doing this work, for putting in the hours, and doing everything I can to make Toronto better, because I'm fighting for my family, I'm fighting for your family, I'm fighting for everybody here to make this a great city to live in. And they're a constant reminder of why local government is so important. When I take them to the park and we still don't have the washrooms open, like it's one thing for you and me when it's inconvenient to hold it. It's another thing when it's a 4-year-old.
It's a crisis situation.
It's a crisis, right? Or when you've got diapers and you have to throw them out and like the garbage bins are overflowing. Or I go back to how difficult it is to get your kids in swimming lessons. Like most of the time I can get one in, but not both. And so is that a trade-off that we have to make in Toronto? Do we have to open up the laptops at 6 a.m. every, device, whether it's your cell phone or iPad or laptop, and you and your wife are sitting there smashing refresh trying to get into the program? These are the types of things that I think we need to do a better job of if we want to be a really great city. And even on the transit front, right? Like we used to have a incredible transit system, a transit system that
people used to come to Toronto to study
it from
abroad.
Yeah, right. And now it is in such a state of disrepair. The reliability is so low, and the safety and the fear on transit is so real. I think about it from a parental perspective, because there's not a lot of instances where I'm taking my 2 and my 4-year-old on the TTC right now, because there's not a 0% chance that somebody is going to be smoking crack or exposing themselves. And until we can get that stuff sorted out, and I'm sorry if people don't like to hear that. I don't like to see it.
No, I've seen it. For the first time in my life, last year I saw someone actually smoke crack on a subway car. So we've reached a point where we do need to talk
real,
about it.
Right? So let's be honest and sober about the problem and get real about the solutions. And it's not the performative nonsense that takes most of the time at City Hall. It's real practical solutions, and someone who has the courage to go and stand up for those things so that we can get the city moving in the right direction.
I love this dad-centric campaign that's about to unfold here. I myself, you're a father of 2, I'm a father of 1. Can you give me your vision for the city in terms of what it will look like for 20 years for our kids? Like, getting away from the metaphors and adjectives. Like, what does the city look like 2 decades from now? What are the tangible differences from what we see here? This is too many condos in the photo, frankly.
Yeah.
But how does the city look and feel different?
I want this to be a city where my daughters, your son, everybody can have access to housing that they can afford. That's the table stakes. And why that is so important, if we want to attract the type of businesses, the type of investment and capital that we need to grow, to improve our GDP, to improve our economic performance, one of the first things that you need to satisfy is that there is housing stock available for people in great neighborhoods that they want to live in, that they can afford. And I'm not talking about affordable housing. That's always the sort of bottom 10% of the income percentile, which is important. That's always just a subsidy from government, whether it's the feds, the province, or the city. That's subsidized housing. But I mean housing that people can afford, whether you are a teacher or a mechanic. You would make too much to qualify for any sort of social housing, but not enough to be able to afford to live here. Those are the folks that contribute to our economy in the service sector, that are building things, that are doing things, and they're leaving. So for our kids, we need to make sure that we have access to housing that they can afford. I want a city that is clean. I want a city that is safe. I want a city that's focused on the table stakes of local government, so that when, if there is an emergency, you call 911, you're not on hold. The trains run on time, they're clean, they're reliable. And I want Toronto to be a destination for the entire world, for people to bring their time and their talent and their treasure and build it here in this city. We have to have that mentality that we want to compete, that we want to be the best. And, we're not just competing north-south anymore. It's east-west, around the world, interprovincial, with the U.S., with countries overseas. I want the biggest companies in the world to select Toronto as a destination, and I want to have some of the most stirring and innovative startups building it here and scaling up their success and creating more prosperity for Torontonians, for Canadians, and putting Toronto on the map in a really profound way. That's what it looks like.
The pursuit of excellence, we'll call it.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, that is Brad Bradford, City Councillor and future 2026 mayoral candidate. Thanks so much for coming on The Hub today.
Let's go. Thanks a lot.